Welcome back. We all have those builds that are always broken. Stop sending those notifications to the trash. Our next talk will walk us through ways to improve the stability of our continuous integration tests so that we can actually depend on them. The build that cried broken, building trust in our continuous integration tests. Please welcome Angie Jones.
Hello, everyone. I'm Angie Jones. I'm the Senior Director of Developer Relations at Applitools and a Java champion. Today, I've come to tell you a story of the build that cried broken. But first, let's talk a little bit about continuous integration, just so that we're all on the same page. The process starts when a developer checks their code into a source control repository, and then that code is integrated, right, with the existing code base and built into what would be the new version of the product. From there, the automated tests are run as part of this build process to ensure that the new changes don't break anything. And then finally, a report is generated, which informs the developer if their check-in is good or not. As I'm sure you all know, all of these pieces must work together in perfect harmony in order for this to be, a healthy and reliable process. However, there's one piece here that gives most teams trouble. Can you guess which piece that is? Yep, it's the test. Fortunately, there's an ancient Greek storyteller by the name of Aesop who seemed to know a little something about continuous integration, even all those centuries ago. And Aesop, he actually left us with a few classic fables that we can apply to our CI tests, such as the boy who cried wolf. As the story goes, there was a young shepherd boy, and he was responsible for looking after the sheep in his village. And the thing about this kid was that he was a prankster. Yeah. So just for kicks, he'd often yell out, "Wolf, wolf!" And all of the village people would come running, concerned about their sheep, only to find this kid laughing hysterically at this little joke of his. Now, this went on for a little while, and the villagers, they fell for the prank the first, 3 or 4 times, but eventually they became hip to his little game and they disregarded the future alarms. Well, one day a wolf really was coming, and the boy, he screamed at the top of his lungs, "Wolf, wolf!" However, no one paid him any attention. The sheep, of course, perished. For many teams, their continuous integration builds have become just like this young shepherd boy. They're crying, "Broken, broken." And in a state of panic, team members, they run and they assess the build. Yet, time and time again, they find that the application is in fact working, but the tests are faulty and giving false alarms. Eventually, what happens? We've all been here. You're probably there now. No one pays attention to the alerts anymore because they've lost faith in what was supposed to be a very important indicator. This used to be my life. I was working as one of many automation engineers on a development team, and our tests were in pretty bad shape. So much so that just like the villagers, we stopped paying attention when the bill cried, "Broken, broken." And when the bill was read, we'd automatically assume it was a problem with the test and we just ignore it. Until one day, our product folks, they needed to demo the application to a potential customer, and the demo failed. Gasp, I know. So our manager was questioned about this, and asked, why haven't we been testing, these important critical features? And we looked through our 4,000 tests, and yeah, we actually did have tests for this. And yep, They had been failing, but we missed them because we stopped listening to the broken bills. So we had completely lost trust in our CI test. And that day, my manager demanded that we get a hold of this. We had to fix this. So I want you to take this journey with me as I share just how we accomplished this. The fox and the goat. A fox was walking along a trail one hot summer day and he became quite thirsty. He noticed that there was a well of water nearby, so he hopped in to get a sip. And once he quenched his thirst, he tried to climb back out, but he was stuck. He had tried and tried to get out with no luck, and eventually he gave up. But don't worry, a bit later, a goat was strolling along this same path and heard noises from the well. And so he went over, he saw the fox, and he asked, "Hey there, Mr. Fox, what are you doing down there?" So the fox responded, "Oh, I was thirsty and the water down here is so good. I came for a drink. It's delicious. You should have some." And the goat said, "Okay." He jumped in the well. And when he jumped in the well, the fox jumped on the goat's back and then was able to escape the well, leaving the goat down there to struggle alone. The moral of this story is to look before you leap. Our team, we wanted to do continuous delivery. And everyone told us, "Yeah, it's great down here. Jump in." They did let us know you'll have to automate your tests and ideally within the same sprint. So we jumped in, and automating the tests became our focus. And this was driven by the metric of 100% of our tests must be automated before closing the sprint. So that's what we started focusing on. But this shouldn't have been our end goal. We're doing in sprint automation, but the bills are red. Think about that. And yet we're steadily adding more and more features, more and more tests. Why? We have 4,000 tests that we ignore. Why are we adding more? Information is worthless in an ignored build. Yes? So, looking at this in hindsight, our true end goal was to obtain fast feedback, but our judgment was clouded by the arbitrary metrics. We had lost our way. The lioness and the vixen. So one beautiful afternoon, a lioness and a vixen, they took their kids outside to play. And as the children were off playing, the mothers began to chit-chat. And you know how moms are, right? So they can't help but to brag on their kids. So as they were doing so, it became a bit of a competition where they were trying to one up each other with the brags. So the Vincent, she talked about how witty and quick her kids were. And the lioness talked about how big and strong her cub was. And then things got a little heated. And the vixen took a verbal jab by saying, "Well, too bad you only have the one. I have a whole litter." And the lioness paused and she held her head high and she said, "Yes, I only have one, but he's a lion." The moral of the story is quality over quantity. So we were adding all the tests, right? We weren't taking a moment to think about what were the right tests to add, which ones would provide valuable information. Again, if our goal, our end goal is fast feedback, having thousands of low value tests running isn't exactly in line with that, right? So the questions that we should have been asking are based on risk and value, which scenarios would cause us to stop an integration or deployment? Which ones exercise critical core functionality? Which ones are providing information that's not already covered by the other 4,000 tests in the pipelines, right? Which ones cover areas of the application that historically have been known to fail? And once we narrow the quantity down, we can truly focus on the quality. Because if there's one lesson that I have absolutely learned the hard way, is that tests that are running as part of a CI/CD pipeline, they must be of high quality, because flaky tests are the death of a continuous integration process. They are a sure way to lose all trust from your team members. So I want to spend a little time on this, because so many preach that we should avoid flaky tests, but very few will tell you how to do that. So I'm going to share some techniques I use to strengthen our tests. And before I start, let me just say most of the tests that were flaky were front end UI tests. So most of the techniques will be around those. Um, Surprisingly to no one, stable identifiers were definitely a huge problem. No identifiers on the elements, or needing to use CSS or XPath selectors instead of unique IDs caused us some trouble, right? So when using those XPath or CSS selectors, you end up relying on the structure of the page. For example, scripting your test to click the second button could be a problem when that structure inevitably changes, right? The use of identifiers that are most likely to change is not a good practice. So things like a label's text, for example. So you definitely want to try to have unique identifiers where you can. And then when we're talking about modern web development, the DOM is so dynamic now. So our identifiers need to be a lot smarter. So definitely pay some attention to that. And with all of the fancy DOM and asynchronous applications, it also became pretty important to incorporate intelligent weighting in our tests. And this is true for both UI or API applications. So we removed all of the hard coded sleeps and waits, that dreaded thread dot sleep. That doesn't work well in tests, right? If you're still sleeping in your test, please wake up, right? This is not what you want to do, trust me. So with our 4,000 tests, even adding, blind 1 to 2 second sleeps would drastically slow down our builds. And remember, what's the end goal? Fast feedback, right? So we changed the test to wait conditionally for whatever it is that we were expecting to happen. For example, waiting for loading indicators on the page to disappear, or Ajax to finish executing. And like I said, sometimes we needed to wait for things that weren't happening at the UI level. So, for example, we might need to wait for API responses to complete, or database transactions. And many of the testing tools have sophisticated APIs that will allow you to wait on a condition to be met versus just, blindly waiting for a specific amount of time. So we use those to help with that. We also realized how difficult it is to manage test data, right? Especially across thousands of tests. For example, let's say that our tests were, searching for I hear what's the movie? Um Black Panther. That's one of my favorite movies. So Black Panther is, has been released a couple of years ago. So let's say that you had a test that was searching some movie database and you search for Black Panther. So you search for this and the result comes back and you're, expecting one result. There it is. Boom. Well, in 2022, next year, part two will come out, the sequel will come out. So if I had that same test next year, all of a sudden that test would start breaking because now I have two results that come back when I search for Black Panther, right? No one wants to chase tests in this way where you have to constantly update the test based on the test data itself. So we had to determine what's our source of truth. And think about, is there an API or a database call that we can make that gives us this answer? And if so, we can utilize that in the test assertion as opposed to like hard coding expectations that could very well and probably will change. Okay. Also, because many of our UI tests were flaky, we modified them to use shortcuts in many cases. For example, let's say we want to test that we can increase the quantity of a product in our cart. Well, if I'm testing this on the UI as an end user, the flow is going to go something like this. I'm going to search for the product. I'm going to find that specific product in the search results. I'm going to click on the product to be taken to the product page. From there, I can click on the add to cart button. And then I go to the cart. And finally, now I can test what it is that I wanted to test. So there's a lot of unrelated activity going on here. And a bunch of that can go wrong before we even get to the test itself. For example, let's say search is broken. Well, that's great to know. However, in addition to my search test failing, I now also have my shopping cart test failing. Why are shopping cart tests blocked just because search is broken, right? That doesn't even make sense when I say it out loud. So this was another factor that annoyed teams with the build, right? You break one little thing and now you have hundreds of tests failing, telling you the exact same thing. I don't need 200 tests to tell me something. One is enough, right? So we started using shortcuts, or I refer to these as code scenes. And these are nice little ways to cheat within your test scenarios. So in my case, if I'm testing quantity increases in the shopping cart, then let's bypass search. And maybe we can even bypass the product page because that's yet another dependency, right? Is there an API, even an internal one, that will allow me to simply add this product to my cart? And if we're talking about the UI and there's a button that does this, then that tells me, yes, there's some kind of call that I can make under the covers that will accomplish that same thing. So we updated our test to use these code seams instead. So now the test becomes make an API request to add the product to the cart, go to the cart on the UI, and boom, you're ready to test. So this is a much simpler, much shorter process, right? And not only does this eliminate the dependency on the other features and the flakiness with the UI, but it also helps with our end goal, which is fast feedback, right? Because these types of tests are much quicker to write and also much quicker to execute, this put us in a really nice position. All right, story time. There was an astrologer, and this guy, he was really deep. He was so into the stars and the moons that he didn't bother talking to fellow humans much. Well, the astrologer, he was out for an evening walk and he was gazing up at the stars in an attempt to read, what was coming in the future. And just as he was making sense of the constellations, he fell into this big puddle of muddy water. The moral of the story here is to pay attention to what's in front of you. So we were so gung ho on, planning for the future that we neglected to pay attention to what was right in front of us. Everyone on the team was focused on new feature development and adding new tests. That we didn't spend any time monitoring these existing tests or maintaining them, right? And that's a problem that lots of teams make. We didn't take the time to listen to what our tests were telling us, what patterns have revealed themselves. We had come to value new code over working code. With this realization, we understood we had to take a step back, because tests are living, breathing creatures. If you don't remember anything else I said from that talk, remember that, right? They must be monitored daily if possible. So, our immediate goal was to ensure that the bills are green. Well, we had hundreds of tests that were in bad shape. So this couldn't be a little, fix a test when you get a spare moment kind of deal. No, we needed to hunker down and focus on this. And to accomplish this, we decided to create tasks every sprint just for monitoring the test. And the rule was anyone could, pick this up. Okay. So in our 2 week sprints, we'd have two of these tasks to monitor the test, one for each week in the sprint. And someone was basically on duty each week to monitor and to maintain the test. And this was their sole responsibility for that week. I know that doesn't sound fun and glamorous, but again, we were in bad shape and we needed to get back on track. So desperate, what's the saying? Desperate something calls for desperate measures. Yeah, that. So this got us some great momentum going. However, so many tests failing on every bill, it became, really difficult to even know which ones we should even go after. You're just kind of paralyzed looking at a sea of red here. So we decided to keep our tests in a database. Nothing major. One table, 5 columns as you see here. But this helped us to triage these tests better. So anytime that a test was executed, the test would write its status to this database. And what this now gave us was a way to gather statistics around the test, right? So we could do things like sort the results to see which one is most likely to fail. So this can indicate stuff like flakiness or problematic areas in the application. So this is a nice starting point. Like this is your, most troublesome test. So that was nice. Or we could see which ones have failed for the very first time. That's interesting because these are more likely to be real bugs in the product, right? The test was working beautifully all along, and this is the first time it's ever failing. Let's look there first. So, this was extremely helpful in figuring out what we should be focused on. All right, we're going to talk about the farmer and the stork. So the farmer was having a problem with a flock of crane birds that would come and dig up all of his planted seeds. And after this happened a couple of times, the farmer decided to plant a trap for them. Well, the crane birds, they were, on their way to the farm and they ran into the stork. And they invited their new friend to come with them to the farm to get some food. Well, everyone loves free food, right? So the stork followed along without much hesitation. And when the birds got to the farm and began to pick at the seeds, they were captured by that net that the farmer cast for them. So the stork immediately began to plead his innocence and, insist that he just met those other birds and he had no idea that this was stolen goods. And the farmer frowned and said to the stork, I don't care. Birds of a feather flock together. Or, in other words, one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. So we have been making great progress cleaning up our tests, right? We got our little database. We know which tests to go after. We're, plugging along. We're fixing up tests, and things are slowly but surely getting better each day. However, no one cared, right? We would report this in stand-ups, and no one cared. Why? Because the bills are still red. All it takes is one flaky test to make the entire bill red. So even if most of the tests were okay in green, it didn't matter. No one trusted the build as a whole. So we had the great idea to separate the tests into two different bills. One for the reliable, trustworthy test. These are only going to fail if the application is broken or something's changed, right? Fail when they need to fail. And we had another bucket for the unreliable tests. And we ran both of these bills, right? But the trustworthy bill was the one for the team to use as part of CI. So this is the one that gated integrations or deployments, and the other one just ran for information. Now, there was a couple of reasons why we kept both of these buckets of tests running. One is we wanted to continue to track the intermittence of the test because remember, the tests are writing their status to the database. So we definitely want to, continue doing this and continue gathering information. And then the other reason is out of sight, out of mind. Yeah. If we just took the bad test out, there would be no visibility into just how much technical debt that we were accruing. But with this approach, we could easily show a build and say, hey, listen, we need time to stabilize our tests, right? It's getting out of control. So we decided to even make a goal. Our goal was that we had to have no more than 1.5% of the tests unstable at any given time, right? Which, if you're talking about 4,000 tests, is 60 tests. If we had more than 60 tests or the 1.5% that were failing or unstable, new development stops, right? We're in crisis mode. It's all hands on deck to get our test failures back down. And we did pretty good at this. So the approach we used to do this was test annotations from your test runner. So that could be JUnit or test in G or whatever you're using. So we used a custom tag, unstable, or custom annotation, unstable for the tests that needed to be updated, and we use bug for tests that are failing with a known bug. Also, once we think that we fixed the test, we didn't immediately move it back into the reliable bunch. We let it run maybe a good 10 times on the bill successfully before we would deem it trustworthy again. And for anything that we marked as unstable, we opened a task for that goes in the backlog. And what I loved about having these tasks in the backlog is that it got prioritized right along with all of the other tickets, right? Um, and so we prioritized it based on how important that test was. So we would pull what we could manage into the sprint in addition to whoever was on duty that week, right? So other team members would also pitch in and grab one of these test stabilization tasks if they had extra time that sprint. One lesson I learned while fixing up the test is that if you find yourself like patching and patching, it might be better to just delete that test and possibly start over. So I heard a talk from a gentleman named Professor Atif Mimam from the University of Maryland. And Dr. Mimam spent a summer working at Google. And he actually studied the fragility of tests during that time. Thought that was fascinating. So yes, even Google struggles with this sort of thing. And he found that after 3 edits to a test, that test is exponentially more likely to become flaky. So as I'm wrestling with this particularly troublesome test for about an hour, I can't get it to work. I remember Dr. Meeman's words and I thought to myself, I bet this is like the 4th edit or something, right? And it's all gonna, just become even worse. So instead of fighting that test, I killed it. I deleted it. I pulled up, the spec and I coded this test from scratch. And then it worked, right? So it took me like 25 minutes to rewrite that entire test versus the hour I spent struggling with no success. Also, this went from 113 lines of spaghetti to 38 lines of lean, clean code, right? So that was good. Sometimes you might have to delete the test. Another thing, another, you know, trigger for you for deleting tests should be like when the tests are failing as part of the bill, always take a moment to think, do we still need this test? It's okay to prune tests out when they're no longer serving value. A key indicator here is when your CI bill fails, you see what's wrong and you don't care. And you say, all right, open a bug and go ahead, push it anyway. And the bug is like low severity and we probably won't get to it anytime soon. That's an indicator. Like that test doesn't need to be gating your deployments, right? So you could delete those, prune them out, or if you just don't want to delete them, you could do the bucket strategy. Maybe have another bucket of like all of your tests that run every day. Could be once a day only, just to give you that information so you know that something is failed, but you don't necessarily need it gating your deployment. Okay. All right. One more story. A dog and a hare got into a heated debate about which one was faster. And after a few minutes of squabbling, they decided to settle it once and for all with an actual race. So the hare was smoking the dog, who eventually caught up, but not enough to pass the hare. So frustrated that he was losing, the dog grabbed a hold of the hare and he bit him. And the hare screams out, like, bro, what are you doing? And the dog apologizes and he licks the hare's wounds and he begs for a rematch. The hare, being the kind, forgiving soul that he is, he agrees to race him again. So they race, and just like last time, the hare is leaving the dog in the dust, right? And also, just like last time, the dog is able to finally kind of catch up, grab him, he bites him again. The hare yells out. The dog apologizes. Again, he begs for a rematch. The hare says, nah, bruh. One minute you're biting me, the next you're licking my wounds. I can't trust you. I don't know if you're friend or if you're foe. Now, once we got our failed test down to less than 1.5% and they're in this healthy state, we had to make sure that the new tests that we introduced didn't become a problem, right? It took a lot of effort to get our bills to a place where we trusted them. All you need is one new test coming in, messing up the program, and then everybody's rolling their eyes again, right? So if you have a lot of people, developers, testers contributing, or you see that you're introducing a high number of flakiness with your new test, I recommend putting these tests in yet another private build though. And in this private bill, you're monitoring it. This is not for the world to see, you know. And maybe after 10 successful runs, you can add it to the CI build, right? The thing is, we sometimes are asking people to trust tests that we don't yet trust ourselves. Yeah. You want to show everybody your ugly baby before it's had a chance to blossom. So this is especially true when you have like new feature areas or you have new people join the team. They're going to make some mistakes, right? New feature areas, there's some unknowns, so there's some assumptions. So there's things that could go wrong. You don't want, to just continuously be adding these new things to your gated build and have them failing all the time for, an unjust cause. So it's best have your little private bill and put them there. And I realize this is a lot of overhead, right? It's like, oh gosh, Angie, another bill. You're but the upside of this is people are going to get in the habit of coding responsibly so that their test can go in the big league right away. And that's the thing. A lot of times developers do not write their tests with the same care that they write their feature code with. for whatever reason, we, just don't view them at the same class. But when you really think about this, your tests are gating your features, right? They need to be very correct. They need to be very sturdy and very reliable. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself in trouble where you're either pushing things that are broken or, missing things and that sort of thing. So you definitely want to put the same love and care into your test code. Follow your design patterns, your OO principles, all of that stuff as you do your feature code. All right. So once we got to this good system where bills were only read when there's something wrong with the application, we were able to use CI as it's supposed to be used, where our developers are watching the bills upon check-ins and they're making sure that they are okay. So we had our 4,000 and counting tests. We achieved that goal where there were no more than 1.5% of the tests that were unstable at any given time. And we honored that rule that if we went above this number, we're out of control. And stabilizing existing tests became a higher priority than writing new code. The reliable bill was green unless there was a change with the application. This is how CI is supposed to work. So that change could be a bug or it could be an intended change. In either case, the test did what it was supposed to do and let us know. And most importantly, the team came to trust the results again. The end. Thank you so very much.
Angie, that was a great talk. It really hit home for me personally with some of the projects I've worked on. I talked in when I introduced you about everybody's got the broken bill that's always broken, right? And one of the things that for me uh, that tends to grate on a team from a morale perspective. That's been my experience. How about you? What's your take on the happiness of the team and team health from besides the technical aspect of things and making things stable? But there's another side to this as well,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, you're definitely right. It's annoying, right? When you have these untrustworthy bills, you work so hard on this feature, you're not really sure about it. You're already kind of crossing your fingers and toes when you push this thing, and to have the bill failed and is not for a valid reason, it's deflating and it's a waste of your time. So eventually, yeah, it affects team morale. You're just kind of working, you feel like you're working in isolation and it's just like whatever. And you're kind of blaming everybody else for what's going on, and it's just not a good feeling. It's not a good place to be in. I'll tell you, once we got to the point where those bills were trustworthy again, you could just see, improvement in the morale of the team. You could see how it felt like we were back a team, we were back collaborating.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And some of the things you talked about in here with regards to tools to get you from that broken build, that regularly broken build to a healthy status with the segmenting and or basically from the decomposing the monolith perspective. I'm used to hearing about the strangulation pattern, right? You cut off a piece of functionality, basically separate it so it's on its own. Doing basically that with your test is really a great idea. I really liked how you did that.
Yeah, and I won't lie, it was painful. It was a very painful process to get to that point, but something had to be done, right? You can't just live like this for the duration of the project. I mean, you can, but you're going to be in an unhappy place and an unsafe place, right? You don't know what you're pushing out there. So it was really critical and important to us to, get to a place where we could trust these bills again. And unfortunately, that did take some hard work. It also took buy-in from higher ups, right? The decision maker. So notice in this process, I needed like permission from management to be able to do this. I needed to be able to add these sort of sprints to the backlog. I needed the product folks to actually understand that this is important and prioritize it accordingly with new feature development, right? So it was definitely a case where you needed the entire team on board and you needed everyone to understand the importance of it.
That brings up a really important point. The buy-in of higher level people, the people setting the priorities. Tech debt's a real thing, and whether it's within your tests or anywhere, getting that prioritized is tough. Do you have any tips for the viewers with regards to ways to sell that from a priority perspective, short of
Yeah,
borrowing and stealing?
yeah, this is not gonna be like, an answer with rainbows and glitter. Um, but sometimes you just have to fail, right? Those bills were in bad shape for a while, and I'm sure there were other people at some point or another. I know me as well. Like, I need to spend some time fixing these tests up, and you're like, no, we gotta write the new test for the new features, and you just didn't get that leeway until it got to a point where we lost a sale because of this, right? And that could happen to you in that way. That could be existing customers, are complaining about high severity bugs. Basically, you got to hit the bottom line for decision makers to really care. And that's really unfortunate. I wish that it wasn't that way. Even with, the experience I have now, when I go into shops consulting and I tell them like, they have to dedicate time to maintaining their test, they don't really want to hear that, right? That is really a hard pitch. It's a hard sell. So sometimes you just got to let the team bump his head and hit him with the "I told you so." And, now here's the plan to get us back on track.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks, Angie, for this great talk. Like I said, it really hit home for me personally. Been on projects and I'm aware of other projects that have had a lot of these very same issues.
Mhm.
So again, thanks. For everybody, be sure to click on the join the discussion link. Angie's going to join the Q&A session. You'll find the Zoom link in that Slack channel there. And there you can dive into deeper questions and get better insights from Angie.
All
Up
right.
next, we've got another bit of storytelling. This one's a very timely tale. This talk will be about Cerner and how they built an application to help COVID-19 vaccination appointments be found. We're going to take a quick break, but you can check that talk out at 2:05 Eastern. Thanks.